Helen hurried up to the third floor of the hospital, clutching a bouquet of white lilies in her hand. She'd been waiting all week for this day, the day her husband would be discharged. Her heart pounded with anticipation. David was finally coming home after a long illness. The narrow hallway smelled of bleach and medicine, the silence broken only by the occasional rattle of a hospital cart. David's room was slightly ajar. Helen was about to step inside when she froze at the sound of voices. "I'm going to miss you," came a soft female voice. "I'll miss you too," David replied quietly. There was tenderness in his tone. "You have no idea how much these days with you have meant to me." Helen felt her heart drop, a sharp pain cutting through her chest. She peered through the doorway. In the room, filled with morning sunlight, David was sitting on the bed. Next to him, perched on the edge, was a young nurse in a pale blue uniform, pretty, with a gentle smile. David was holding her hand. "You'll see me off tomorrow, right?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "Of course. I already arranged for Sarah to cover for me for an hour. I couldn't possibly let you leave without saying goodbye." The bouquet trembled in Helen's hands. She leaned against the wall, willing herself not to make a sound. Her heart now pounded so hard it felt like it might split her chest open. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her David, the man she'd visited every morning, worried over, bought fruit and warm socks for, was sitting there holding another woman's hand, looking at her the way he hadn't looked at Helen in years. Her head swam. In a haze, she kept listening, unable to move. "Maybe I'll tell my wife I need to stay one more day," David's voice carried out of the room. "I'm sure she won't mind. She's very understanding." The nurse let out a soft laugh. "I hope your wife really is understanding." Helen couldn't listen any longer. She stepped back, trying not to make a sound. Every word cut like a knife. Turning around, she tiptoed down the hallway. Tears stung her eyes, but inside her burned a mix of shame and fury. How could he? Here, in the hospital where she'd practically camped outside his door, praying for his recovery. A surge of pain overwhelmed her, and she almost ran to the elevator, holding back sobs. The room with its treacherous whispers stayed behind her. The elevator was taking too long, so she rushed down the stairs. The steps blurred in front of her. Bursting out onto the first floor, she nearly collided with an elderly cleaner, who grumbled something after her, but Helen didn't hear, her ears rang. Once outside, she sat on a bench for several minutes, face buried in her hands. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to break down completely. Someone might recognize her. After all, her husband was a well-known architect in town, and during his illness, many at the hospital had come to know her by sight. She didn't want pity or sympathetic looks. After a while, the trembling in her body eased. Helen wiped her damp cheeks. She had to keep moving, do something, anything, before she lost her mind. She found her car keys in her coat pocket. The drive home was a blur. City streets slid past in a fog, gray building facades, traffic lights, bakery, and pharmacy windows. Twice someone honked at her. She must have forgotten to move when the light turned green. Luckily, habit and muscle memory carried her to her building. The apartment was silent. As soon as Helen stepped inside, the emptiness and heavy stillness crashed down on her. She leaned against the door, eyes closed. Everything reminded her of David. She felt her heart might burst from the pain. She had trusted him completely, never doubting his love. She'd counted down the days until his discharge, picturing herself carefully leading David to the car. And he'd been finding comfort in another woman's arms. The image flashed in her mind again, her husband holding the young nurse's hand, his face warm and tender in a way it hadn't been with her in years. No, it couldn't be. Maybe she was imagining things, seeing through a lens of jealousy. Maybe David was just thanking her for her care. For a moment, a desperate hope stirred inside her. But then she remembered, "I'll tell my wife I need to stay one more day." No, that wasn't gratitude, it was scheming behind her back. Betrayal. A fresh wave of anger swept over her, drying her tears. Helen jumped up from the couch. Her vision swam from all the crying, her chest burning with resentment. After all their years together, after everything they had been through, he was risking their marriage for a fleeting fling, and lying about being too sick to come home so he could meet with the nurse. She ran into the bedroom, where everything was ready for his return. On the chair by the bed lay a fresh set of pajamas, neatly ironed by her hands. On the nightstand, a new bottle of cologne, her gift for the occasion. Now these tender preparations felt like a cruel joke. Despair mixed with rage. She wanted to throw it all on the floor so he'd never see it. Her breath came fast. She needed to decide what to do next, but her mind was blank. Storm into the hospital and make a scene? No. She couldn't bear to show her pain, or see them together again. Wait for his discharge tomorrow and face him? The thought alone made her sick. Sometime past midnight, Helen realized she wasn't crying anymore. One thought pulsed quietly in her mind: I can't go on like this. She got up, opened the window to let in the cool night air, and looked out over the city, scattered lights, sleeping buildings. She remembered years ago, before she was married, being alone in her old apartment. How lonely it felt then, but also how free. She belonged to herself. Then David came along, and the loneliness vanished. But so did her freedom, because she loved him and poured herself into caring for him, their home, their shared future. She had always thought of them as one. Now that unity was gone, David had shattered it in one blow. Maybe it was time to remember what it meant to stand on her own. Fear gave way to emptiness, then to a strange determination. She knew she had to act, or the dawn would find her in the same hopeless state. First of all, she didn't want to see David, not tomorrow, not ever. At least not while the wound was so fresh. What if, when he came home in the morning, she couldn't stop herself from breaking down, or worse, from forgiving him? Why risk it? Better that he come home and find he can't get in. That way he'd understand immediately how serious this was. The idea came suddenly, but once it took root, it felt right. Helen made up her mind. She would change the lock. Early in the morning, she stood at the door, steadying the keyhole. Quietly, careful not to make noise, she unscrewed the old mechanism. Her hands trembled, the screwdriver slipping, but her resolve kept her going. Half an hour later, a new lock was in place. Helen went to the living room and stood by the window. From the third floor, she had a clear view of the courtyard and the entrance. She felt like a guard on a fortress wall, waiting for the enemy. Her heart ached, but a steel rod of stubbornness braced her from within. No matter how much it hurt, she had decided there would be no forgiveness. Around noon, she spotted a familiar figure. David. He stopped in front of the building. Helen's heart skipped. He was looking for her, hoping to see her waiting. She stepped back from the window, unwilling to watch. A moment later, the quiet of the apartment was broken by the sound of a key trying to turn in the lock. Once, twice, but it wouldn't budge. Then came the doorbell. Helen stood just a few feet away, watching the door chain tremble. Just one barrier separated her from the man she had loved more than life only yesterday, but today feared and wanted nothing to do with. Helen, came David's muffled voice from the other side. Are you home? Open up, my key isn't working for some reason. She stayed silent, hand pressed over her mouth. Hearing his voice was both a relief and a stab in the heart. All she could hear in that Helen now was pure falseness. Helen, David's voice grew more urgent. It's me, please, open the door. She realized he wasn't going to just leave. She'd have to open it. She unlatched the lock, and the door cracked open a few inches before catching on the chain she'd deliberately left in place. Through the narrow gap, Helen saw his pale, tired face. David spotted her too and let out a breath of relief. Thank God. You scared me. What happened to the door? He stopped short. Helen's eyes, staring at him from the dim apartment, were cold and unrecognizable, ice and pain. The look sent a chill down his spine. Helen, he began uncertainly, I thought you'd meet me at the hospital, but I guess we misunderstood each other. Let me come in. He tried to slide his hand through the gap, but the chain held the door firm. I think you'd better leave, she said quietly, her voice rough from tears and a sleepless night. Helen, what's going on? David pleaded, trying to meet her eyes. I heard everything. And I saw it with my own eyes, she said flatly, cutting him off. David blinked. What exactly did you see? He asked cautiously. Yesterday, I mixed up the date of your discharge and came a day early. Helen drew a breath, trying to keep her voice even. I saw it all, David. You. And that nurse. He went pale. For a moment, they stood in silence, separated by nothing more than a thin chain that now felt stronger than a wall. Helen, he whispered at last, I don't know what you think you saw, but she's a nurse, she was just doing her job. Really? Helen let out a bitter laugh. And what kind of job is that, exactly? Enlighten me. David swallowed. His lips trembled as he searched for words. I was sick. I was weak. She was there for me, that's all, just being supportive, he said in a pitiful tone. It was just flirting, nothing serious. Helen stayed silent, each word from him deepening the ache inside her. I was alone in that room, feeling awful, and she showed me attention, David went on, his voice cracking. It flattered me, I admit it. But it didn't mean anything, I swear. He tried again to push the door open, his fingers slipping inside, but she spoke firmly, without raising her voice. Take your hand out. And take yourself with it. David quickly pulled his hand back, stunned by a tone he had never heard from her before. Helen, he whispered helplessly, I was wrong. But please, sweetheart, it didn't mean anything. We can put this behind us. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. Helen's vision darkened for a moment at those words. If you loved me, she whispered, you wouldn't have betrayed me. It was weakness, David rushed to say. I'll explain everything, I promise. Just give me a chance. What chance are you talking about? Helen shook her head bitterly. You had your chance when you made your choice in that hospital room. It wasn't a choice, it was a mistake, he burst out, losing his composure. Don't throw it all away. Please. I just got better. We have so many plans ahead. Let's just talk this through. She looked at him steadily. In her mind, the image from yesterday replayed, his tender gaze aimed at someone else. There's nothing left for us, Helen said quietly. You destroyed it. David let out a heavy breath, pressing his palms to the door in desperation. We've been together for years, you won't survive without me. Something inside her snapped. She unhooked the chain, flung the door open, and stepped into the hallway, forcing him to back up. Won't survive? Her voice shook, but she pressed on relentlessly. You think I can't live without you? I've spent the last few months living for you, and this is how you repaid me. David retreated, startled by a fire he had never seen in his quiet, accommodating wife. He reached for her hand. Calm down. But Helen yanked her hand away before he could touch her. Don't you dare touch me, she said through clenched teeth. You disgust me, and you should know, I will never let you hurt me again. She nearly shouted the last words through the sob building in her throat. David lifted his hands as if to shield himself, dropping his bag in the process. A bottle of pills rolled across the landing. He froze, looking from them back to her. Silence filled the stairwell, her words echoing off the walls. Helen's breath came fast, her knees threatening to give way. But there was no going back. Helen, he called softly, reaching toward her. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time in years, she saw him cry. Usually so composed, now he was completely shaken. But it didn't move her. It was too late. Leave, she said on an exhale, stepping back into the apartment. Just go. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes, not for him, but for her old self, naive, blind. For him, she felt nothing. "I need time," she said in a low voice. "And so do you. Don't call me, don't try to see me. I'll reach out if I'm ever ready." "Which I seriously doubt." "What? What does that mean?" he whispered. Helen met his gaze, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "It means I'm not your wife right now. And maybe I never will be again." David shut his eyes, 2 tears sliding down his cheeks. "Please, forgive me," he rasped. Helen closed the door without a word. Just before it clicked shut, she heard a broken sob escape him. She felt the weight of the years they had lost, of the trust she had given, but not for him. Inside the apartment, she leaned her forehead against the wall. She was trembling all over. Yet, alongside the pain, a strange relief began to grow. It was over. The worst was behind her. She stepped away from the door and sank to the floor in the hallway. Covering her face with her hands, she let the tears come, tears that cleansed and released her. She cried for their love, for the hopes that had died yesterday in that hospital room. But she also cried for her freedom, from deceit, from humiliation, from a life built on a lie she hadn't even known she was living. She didn't know how long she sat there, time blurred. But when the tears finally stopped, Helen felt a strange clarity. The pain was still there, but it was quieter. And deep down, a small spark had appeared. A spark of hope. She rose unsteadily and went to the hallway mirror. An exhausted face stared back at her, eyes swollen and red. But behind them, there was a new glint, a glint of resolve. Resolve to move forward. This was her home now. Just hers. Everything in it would be hers, and nothing would remind her of the betrayal. She would get rid of it all, throw it out, give it away, it didn't matter. She would start fresh, from a clean slate. The thought of a future without David scared her. But in that fear, there was also curiosity. Who might she become now that she no longer had to live someone else's life? Helen took a deep breath, and to her surprise, her lips curved into a faint but genuine smile. Through the exhaustion, through the tears, through everything she had been through, this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. Her beginning. And even though she didn't know where the new path would lead, the decision to take the first step was already hers. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to share it with your friends and family. Like and subscribe so you don't miss new episodes, and let us know in the comments where you're reading from. We'd love to hear.